Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the final day of the Avalanche Summit. My name is Limaris Torres, and I'm hosting a workshop today called Fortifying Avalanche, Insights and Best Practices for Blockchain Security. For those of you that don't know me, I'm an independent hacker/researcher. My expertise includes cybersecurity, blockchain security, incident response, education. I've been in cybersecurity professionally for around 10 years now, and I'm just on a mission to make innovating safe again, securing blockchains one line of code at a time. That's my game. So why am I here? I'm here because for those of you that are not familiar with hacks in this space, they're very, very, very expensive. I used to work in traditional cybersecurity, and usually when we had an incident, the only thing that we would lose was data, which is bad, and we had to pay fines for that, and it was bad for our reputation. But data is not as expensive, as you can see here. The average cost of repairing and the average cost of the loss and fines and everything for a traditional Web 2 company, the average cost of a hack is $4 million. On blockchain, however, we're not so worried about data because everything is transparent, everything is decentralized. It's more like a payment system that we have. And our most important asset, and the only asset that most of us care to protect, is one, privacy, and two, the funds. So whenever any hack happens in blockchain, it usually results in around a couple $1 million. I believe on Rect, the most expensive hack of all time is 600 million. There was a couple hacks in the last few weeks for 6 million, 8 million, 20 million. So on average, we have here, it is definitely way more expensive than having an auditor come in and check your work, or than hiring a security team. So I encourage all of you to take security very seriously because it is very expensive in the Web3 space. Now, what do I mean when I say take security seriously? There's different types of threats to the blockchain space specifically. Some of the threats to the Thank you. Some of the threats are to the blockchain specifically based on how consensus mechanisms work. So there's things like 51% attacks. There's things like double spending attacks. There's things like Sybil attacks. There's other threats to projects specifically, and anybody who's building in the space, things like having smart contract vulnerabilities, things like losing your private keys or having them stolen, supply chain attacks, and different code injection vulnerabilities. Now, code injection is not always a Web3 vulnerability. It's a Web 2 vulnerability usually that affects a Web3 project because we have a full stack. Anyway, and more importantly, we have different types of threat actors. So everybody's favorite picture is always a hacker in a hoodie looking all mysterious. Sometimes these threat actors are nation-state sponsored. Sometimes these threat actors are just individual hacking groups. Regardless, hacking blockchains is a very lucrative business, which is why they're here. They're here to stay. They're coming at us. They're targeting us consistently. Here, I have a list of some common vulnerabilities. Anybody in the room a developer? Anybody? No developers in the room. Wow. Okay, one developer in the room. No developers in the room. Okay, cool. Any builders? Does anybody here work in Web3? Yay! Okay, all right. Here are some common vulnerabilities that y'all should be aware of. A lot of the vulnerabilities that result in the loss of funds are related to smart contracts. However, the rest of the stack can still be exploited and can still be affected by different types of attack as well. So in smart contracts specifically, in my experience, the top 10 most common vulnerabilities that I tend to run across are like reentrancy attacks, integer over and underflow, there's like time manipulation attacks, unchecked return values, broken access controls, because we're just not very good at designing access control systems, apparently, in Web3. Malicious dependencies, or just bad dependencies whenever we're coding and we get a little too complicated. Gas limit attacks, of course. Price manipulation, front-running / MEV, is that a vulnerability? Is that a feature? I don't know, I guess we're still discovering that and having that conversation. And more importantly, bad randomization, because bad randomization is really, we'll get into that at another point. But bad randomization, once I can predict how you're randomly generating like private keys for wallets, then I can wreck your whole network. And then for the rest of the stack, remember that smart contracts do manage how we interact on the blockchain and how we transact on the blockchain, but we're still using like Web 2 web apps to access these. So we have common things like, and we're still using, infrastructure, and we still have everyday people like you and me interacting with this. So we do have like misconfigured nodes. Sometimes, authentication on the nodes is exposed, or like RPC and stuff will be exposed. We have financial attacks, kind of like what happened to Mango Markets, where is it really a hack or was it just a hell of a trade? Debatable, I guess, depending on what side you're on. We have social engineering, which is what led to one of the most famous hacks, just getting an email with PDF, having your private key stolen, and then compromising like 3 out of 6 people who had a multi-sig. Social engineering is like the oldest trick in the book. It's just scams, and wherever there's money, the scams will follow. They'll go into AI next. DNS hijacking. This is a very old vulnerability that I'm surprised works in Web3 because we're supposed to be like so advanced and innovative. But DNS hijacking is essentially someone will steal your domain name and then port it over to a malicious site and redirect all your user traffic. Governance attacks based on how we manage governance on chain, the different members of a DAO, how they're voting, things get a little complicated. And more importantly, improper key management. How many of us keep our private keys on text files or in our Notes app? Okay, good, nobody here. That's progress. I asked that question a year ago, and some people very embarrassedly looked the other way. But yeah, improper key management, use like a provider, ideally, and we'll talk about designing systems that work. Hold on, clickety click, click. There we go. So, how do we fortify our smart contracts to make the Avalanche ecosystem more resilient? Here are some concrete and very direct instructions. I'm a tech person. I like direct instructions. Formal verification is something that everybody's been talking about lately. Use formal verification tools to ensure the correctness of your smart contracts and prevent vulnerabilities. You want to make sure you're using secure coding practices and not doing git YOLO 3,000 line commits at 2 in the morning. No git YOLOs, please. So use secure coding practices to prevent buffer overflows, integer overflows, and other types of common vulnerabilities. Be aware of those as well. We want to make sure that we're regularly conducting security audits and that we're regularly testing to identify and address any vulnerabilities. Whoever your favorite auditor is, be best friends with them, but make sure that you're doing more than just the smart contracts as well, even though the slide is on smart contracts. Implement multi-factor authentication for all network access. Make sure that everybody's GitHub accounts have multi-factor authentication enabled so bad actors can't push stuff. Regularly conduct security audits and penetration testing to identify and address vulnerabilities. Even though we do audits, again, sometimes there's different, I mentioned that twice, but there's a reason I mentioned that twice. There's different types of security testing that you can do. DevSecOps. And building with security in mind is very important instead of just kind of building everything and then sending it to an audit and then being like, okay, well, none of this is secure. You have to entirely redesign your system kind of thing. So build with security in mind and your favorite auditor hand in hand. And just try to avoid unnecessary complexity. Everybody's like ZK, EVM, decentralized, scalable AI, blah, 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 throwing as many buzzwords as possible together. And I find that often the simpler things are the easiest to secure, and the more complex it is and the more dependencies it has, the more vulnerabilities you end up exposing yourself to. So try to minimize those external dependencies and try to use reputable libraries, stuff that's been audited before, and follow industry best practices based on whatever ecosystem you're building on. The Avalanche community has a lot of good developer docs that they're working on, so check those out. There, it's working now. Okay, so blockchain security testing. So there's no developers in the room, sadly. So I'll just briefly touch on this, but there's different types of testing. There's unit testing, there's integration testing, there's formal verification, as I mentioned earlier. And some of my favorite tools for testing EVM-based projects are Echidna. I don't know how to say that. I hope I said that correctly. And it's something that we use for fuzz testing. Slither, which is a very popular static code analyzer, and SemGrep, which is another popular static code analyzer. Tools are your friend, but they are not 100% reliable. Also, make sure you're using a testing framework or a library that can help automate your testing if you're not an expert in the space. There's different popular development frameworks by ecosystem, like I think Ethereum or something had Truffle, and it has all these built-in suites for testing smart contracts. So whatever ecosystem you're on, try to figure out what the developers are doing and use those same frameworks and tools. Here we have wallet security. Probably one of the more important things that I come across that's not necessarily a smart contract vulnerability, but that people do get wrecked a lot from. It's improperly designing wallets. It's improperly designing access to the wallets within their team whenever they're managing their project funds. So rule number one, I shouldn't have to say this, but I've seen it in the wild, so don't share your keys. Just like have different, use a multi-sig, have different keys, but don't share the same keys. So yeah, use a multi-sig is the second one. Conduct social engineering assessments or make sure that you're aware of popular scams lately. It's been going around Telegram, I think, recently, where people will pretend to be your friend or someone that you know, and then they'll message you and they'll say, oh, I need help. I think my transaction is stuck. Can you connect and see if it's true? And as soon as you connect, you get wrecked and you get drained. Or they'll be like, oh, can you send funds for X and Y reason? And there's all sorts of ways in which they're hacking you. So be aware of all of these tactics. Trust but verify. If your friend is ever asking you for help with their wallet, trust that your friend is smarter than that and call them. Maybe don't text them, just call them. Validate in another way that their account wasn't actually compromised. Yes? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'll repeat what he said. He was saying nowadays with AI, it's really difficult because of all the deep fakes that can pretend to be you with your voice and whatnot. This is true. Validate in another way, video call, go see them in person, whatever way you guys communicate. Also, make sure that your chat has history. Ideally, when you're talking to your friend, unless you're super kind of like distracted or whatever and you're in the middle of a million things, ideally you would scroll up and make sure that it's the same chat that you use with your friend. So trust but verify, be very careful of all the scams. There's a bunch of Twitter scams going around right now too that will ask you to connect your wallet for an airdrop and it's not the real airdrop. Make sure that you're not using SMS as two-factor authentication because you can get SIM swapped. So the ideal is to use like a Google Authenticator app or any type of authenticator app instead of SMS. Don't get SIM swapped, you will get wrecked. And double check transaction details and the bytecode if needed. There's a way to spoof addresses whenever we're like sending transactions, and a lot of people will like copy paste from their history wherever they send it. Don't do that. Always verify that you're sending to the correct address. Think before you click and don't get wrecked, essentially. And use a reliable wallet provider. I don't like all of these random brand new wallet providers popping up claiming to be amazing and safe, but then they're sending all my private keys to like analytics services. Very, very sus. All right, and here's another thing that we don't talk about a lot in the blockchain space specifically. You can write secure code, you can get audited, but if you're not monitoring for threats, you are going to get wrecked and you're going to find out from Twitter that something is wrong. If your security strategy for threat detection is wait until someone tweets that we've been hacked, call me. That is not okay. We can talk about this and we can figure out how we can monitor your network activity for traffic that's like normal and configure alerts for things that are suspicious. We can analyze transactions on your project, whatever your DeFi project is. We can configure alerts for whenever there's a spike or a sharp decrease or whatever. You need to be aware, you need to be monitoring this. You need to have someone looking at your project regularly to make sure that everything is operating, not just for security, but also for performance reasons. You need to conduct security assessments so that you can be aware of where your weaknesses lie, and you need to be monitoring whatever those weaknesses are. Implement robust security measures like multi-factor authentication. If I get a prompt to authenticate on my phone and I'm not trying to do anything, that in itself is an alert that something's going wrong. And more importantly, stay informed. So do check Twitter for the latest and greatest in cybersecurity incidents, but don't rely on it as your personal threat detection for your project. And with that, I think I was told to rush because our closing ceremony is coming. So if you have any additional questions, feel free to message me on Twitter. The Avalanche community is great, and they have a lot of developer resources that you can check out. And thank you for coming to my talk. If you'd like to follow me on Twitter, my username is Limaris T, and you can always DM me. I'm happy to answer security questions, and I do freelance work, so thank you and bye.